Morning, guten Morgen, and thank you, Connie. It's an honor to be with you. I confess that the task that Connie was kind enough to give me in coming here was to give you not only the American perspective, but help you make some sense out of what's coming out of Washington, D.C. right now. And I have to tell you, this is probably one of the most difficult tasks I've been ever asked to do, which is saying something given that I did start my career in the Navy SEALs. And had this wonderful career, but perhaps because I wasn't that good at it, I transitioned at some point out of being on the operational side, on the combat side, into being an advisor in increasingly senior levels until I ended up working at the White House for 2 US presidents, advising them on national security. And then, as I'll get into, I left to found a leadership institute to get into the study of leadership, and I went back to being an academic. But before I left, I wanted to take my children to work because I had young children and they had never been to the White House. And I figured they're never going to let me back in the building, so I have to take the kids. So I asked my son, who was young too at the time, Eric, would you like to go to work with Dad? Would you like to go see the White House? And he said, yes, very excited. So we go in on a Saturday, we walk into the White House, and as I go inside the building, I look down at little Eric and he's crying. He is crying. And it turns out we had a giant misunderstanding because the whole time I said, would you like to go see the White House? He thought I'd been saying, would you like to go see a lighthouse? Which is the first message of the morning, which is a reminder from my son that the earth does not revolve around the White House. It's also a reminder that my son loves everything at the beach. Who are the beach people here? They love the beach. So I'm going to confess I am not a beach person, and the next picture is evidence why this is my first trip to the beach. Very different experience. I cried. It was miserable. But it really makes sense when you see a picture of my second trip to the Pacific Ocean was to the exact same beach, by coincidence, almost exactly 20 years later, and I had almost exactly the same experience. This, of course, was SEAL training, and I didn't cry as much the second time. At this point in my career, what's important to know is this is what I studied. I knew everything there was to know about every Soviet tank there was. And in 20 years in the Navy, this is the only Soviet tank I ever saw. Rusting on the hills of Afghanistan, where we were there to fight the Taliban. And when I went through the Naval Academy, I didn't know where Afghanistan was, and I did not know who the Taliban were. And if you had asked me then, would we also see Soviet tanks on the battlefields of Ukraine? Of course not. And the point is that we're not very good at predicting the future. When it comes to predicting our next military engagements, our record has been perfect. We have never once gotten it right, said our former Secretary of Defense. And by the way, it's not just the defense establishment. There is no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share, said the former CEO of Microsoft. So it's not just that we're bad at predicting the future. My thesis is that it's actually getting worse, and it's getting worse fast, mostly because of the accelerating pace of change of technology. What we see now in the fourth industrial age, where we're all living, characterized by speed and connectedness of information, is it's right on the heels of the third industrial revolution, characterized by processing power and automation, and now we're already talking about the fifth industrial revolution. There is a clear compression of these things. For the last 400 years, most humans were lucky if they lived through one industrial revolution. Most of you in this room will live through 3. This is an accelerating pace of change that is dizzying, and most of us cannot keep up, and our systems cannot keep up. So we have economic, macroeconomic instability, we have political instability, we have geopolitical instability, and of course we have Trump 2.0 instability. And back in Washington, D.C., the question right now everyone is asking themselves, is Trump the cause of the chaos, or is he the cause of some grand design that we are yet to be revealed? And I would actually like to offer a third way of interpreting this, which is that Trump may be causing instability, but Trump is as much a symptom of the instability as he is the cause. And if we take that as the premise, I'd like to explore what that means and how we rethink frameworks in our approach to the world in 3 areas. And these roughly correlate to the 3 phases of my career, starting with security, then we'll talk about leadership, and then finally where I am now with resilience. But let's start with security, because that's where my career started. My career started before 9/11, as you can imagine. And I started, as you would expect of a Navy SEAL, spending most of my time underwater. This is a SEAL delivery vehicle. This is what we principally used back then for undersea special operations. And as I demonstrated this morning, I was miserable underwater because it was freezing most of the time, and it was very limited in what we could do. So at a certain point, we started evolving our capabilities, and we built more sophisticated mini-subs. And this is the one I spend most of my time in. It was the world's most advanced mini-sub. We could do extraordinary things, as you see. Anchor on the bottom, we could lock things out of the bottom. And people sometimes say, well, did it look like that? And I say, no, not once, not ever. This was special operations, of course. We did this at night. So that perhaps is the more accurate depiction. But really, we did this at night, and we did it without the benefit of any lights, because we were doing it in parts of the world we were not supposed to be in. So it really looked like that. It's not very glamorous work, and I can't tell you about most of it, but I can tell you one thing about it. We could literally take this capability anywhere in the world because we could put it on the back of submarines. And we were doing this because we realized at the time that our next conflict was going to be with near-peer competitors who would deny us the use of the airspace, who would deny us awareness of the battle space. And the only place we had truly clandestine mobility was undersea. So we were investing very heavily in undersea special operations. And then this happened. And most of us ran off to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I have to tell you that my experience from fighting in those 2 places, despite being the world's most advanced military, with the best resources, the best equipment, the best training, is that we were struggling against a third world insurgency. And obviously the track record is that we failed in these engagements. And I think it's worth thinking about what that means for security going forward. One of my first memories was driving in a tank down the streets of Ramadi in Iraq. And we drove over a water pipe which burst. So the village was now without water, and it was flooding. And of course, we did not win them over that day. And I remember thinking to myself, why are we fighting in tanks? And the answer was because we were afraid to let people get hurt. We were not willing to suffer casualties or fatalities in this war. Why? Because it was a war of choice. It was not a war of necessity. We were not fighting an existential threat. The greatest threat we faced was from improvised explosive devices. This is something that happened almost every day to us. We would get blown up by these things. This was one particularly bad day. The 2 gentlemen in the front seat of that vehicle lived, but just barely. And the first lesson we should have learned is that a $200,000 vehicle was destroyed by $200 worth of fertilizer. There was a great asymmetry at play. And yet the lesson we learned was, let's build bigger vehicles. Let's build more expensive vehicles. What happened in Ukraine was quite different. We went in the other direction. We went smaller. We went less expensive. So we learned that while war may be the crucible of innovation, that is only true when you're fighting a true existential war of necessity. It is not true when you're fighting a war of choice. And moreover, the enemy does not care how expensive or exquisite or sophisticated your weapon systems are. And yet the United States spent 2 decades trying to build more sophisticated, more exquisite, more expensive systems. As you might tell, I was very frustrated by this experience. And I spoke up increasingly about my experience. So I transitioned at some point from wearing the uniform to wearing the suit, and I became an advisor to the point where I worked for 2 presidents, Presidents Bush and Obama, and spent 6 years, as you heard, in the White House doing this work. And despite what you usually see on TV, most of the meetings do not happen in the Oval Office. It's a ceremonial place. Most of the meetings would be in the White House Situation Room, where you do the real work. And because it was the White House Situation Room, we can't tell you about most of these meetings, to include this one. This one happened about a week after the raid that killed bin Laden. We had a meeting to discuss what we should do next. This meeting, however, you can know about, because it leaked to the press, and the New York Times published precisely what I said to the president in that moment. I told him that bin Laden was probably laughing in his watery grave. And my point was that we should exit Afghanistan because we were playing into bin Laden's strategy. That bin Laden's published strategy had been to draw the United States into an expensive, costly war that would distract it and weaken it. That the United States would spend its blood and treasure in a war chasing this black flag around the globe. And that's precisely what we did. And that was my point. I was trying to get the attention of the people in the room that it was time to shift gears. And of course, you know how this turned out. While I was there in the sit room, I saw many other things happen. You'll remember this, 2014, Russia's invasion of Crimea and the Little Green Men. And what was most striking at the time was that the story of the Little Green Men was that Russia was changing the playbook, not just in terms of its aggressive posture, but how it advanced its forces. Because this was not how we were operating. This was a different playbook. And it was happening elsewhere in the South China Sea, you'll remember. That China not only built but militarized these new oceans in the or islands in the South China Sea. My point here is that I think we wasted the peace dividend. We spent 2 decades in a mode of strategic distraction. We took our eye off the ball, and we lost 2 decades worth of innovative potential. And the rest of the world was not wasting its time as we did. Russia and China were not sitting idle. And I think we're drifting into a new multipolar reality where the two centers of influence in the United States and China are now competing for the other centers of power in Europe, in the Gulf, and so forth. And we're behind in this. And most of what the American system is doing right now is in sort of quiet recognition that it is behind. And because I was frustrated then again with the decisions coming out of our national security system, I left government to found a leadership institute and study how we make decisions about policy, to see if I could find ways to improve these decisions. And in the course of doing that, I founded a leadership institute. I wrote a book on the topic with my co-authors Stan McChrystal and Jan Mangone. And the book opens with this vignette of Washington crossing the Delaware, one of the most recognizable paintings in American history. And it has something to do with Germany because it was painted by a German-American, Emanuel Lutz. And the original was actually in a collection here in Germany, and it was unfortunately destroyed in an Allied bombing raid, coincidentally in 1942. Thankfully, Emanuel Lutz painted 2 reproductions, one that's very large, it's hanging in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and one that was smaller, and it used to be hanging in the West Wing lobby of the White House. And I happen to know a lot about this one painting. And I only know a lot about this one painting because I used to sit on this couch for many hours of the day. And as I would sit on this couch, the tour groups would come through. And the tour guide would stop right in front of my couch and tell their tour group everything about the painting that was right over my head. And here it is, Washington crossing the Delaware. Now, I want you to focus in on Washington, and I want you to think of the first word that comes to mind. Don't think too hard. What do you have, Connie? What's the first word that comes to mind? Pride. What do you have? Leader. Some people say lazy. He could be doing more. And what I learned all those hours sitting on the couch is it's a fiction. The Delaware River has never frozen like this. That's actually the wrong flag. And Washington did not cross in a whaling boat, a little boat. He actually had a very large flat-bottom barge. This is the more accurate depiction of Washington crossing the Delaware. And now look at Washington again. He's holding on to the wheel of a cannon. Why? because that's what real people do in a boat at night going to war. They don't do this. Why not? Because it's ridiculous. I have showed this painting, you know, to thousands of people. I always ask how Washington looks. No one ever says Washington looks ridiculous. But they should. Because all of us subscribe to a certain mythology about our leaders. We exaggerate what our leaders are capable of. We think too much about them. By the way, they perpetuate this mythology. Most of our leaders want us to believe this about them, but it is a myth. We call this the myth of the heroic leader. And it's part of the human condition. It's natural, but it's very distorted. And it is in the human psyche. And now you can see this in AI, right? Which is, most of us are obsessed with AI. Very few of us know how to use AI, but most of us know how to play with AI. So I play with AI. Last year I asked it to draw a leader. This is what you get. A dystopian image of authoritarian sort of representations. And this is representative of what is in our psyche, because that is where the AI is trained. Now, more recently, you ask it again, because the models are being tweaked and the weights change, and you get something that's a little bit more reasonable, but still a little freaky. Now, for the women in the audience, you'll be comforted to know, because you're picking up on a pattern here, if I change the prompt to draw an effective leader, we finally get a woman. However, we still have a problem, right? Because we still have this very authoritarian representation of leadership. So what's going on here? And those of us who study leadership owe an explanation, because this is not what we teach. What we teach is humility. The most powerful leaders are the humble leaders, the servant leaders. And this is true. You can go back to our Leadership Institute and you can find all of the literature that says that this is true. And we tell people this, we teach this, and then we get difficult questions like, well, if humility is so good, how do you explain that guy? How do you explain that America's most successful organization was led by somebody known for their arrogance, not their humility? How do you explain the fact that narcissistic personality types are overrepresented by far in senior leader positions? Please explain this to us. And we owe you an explanation. And for those of you who missed your yoga or your mindful this morning, we will start with a breathing exercise. I want you all to take a deep inhalation with me. Hold it. Good. Breathe in some more. Hold it. Breathe in some more. Hold it. Where's Guy? Exhale. Connie's turned red. Exhale, everybody. I am not a breathing coach. I do this only to illustrate a simple point. Inhalation without exhalation is silly. You should never do this. These two things are in opposition. They are in tension with one another, and they belong together. They are made powerful together. They are made beautiful together. This is the idea of a polarity. And a polarity is the most powerful thing in leadership you have never heard of. And polarity explains the paradox of Steve Jobs. I was once speaking at a conference with Ed Catmull, the CEO of Pixar, and I asked him, please explain the paradox of Steve Jobs. And he had heard this question before. He said, you have to understand, there was not one Steve Jobs, there was two. The first Steve Jobs failed at Apple. He got kicked out, went to Pixar. He failed at Pixar. He got kicked out of Pixar, went back to Apple as the second Steve Jobs. And it was the second Steve Jobs who says this: it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. Catmull's idea was that Ed was saying that Jobs was not effective because he was confident. he was only effective once he learned to match and balance his sense of confidence, his arrogance, with a learned sense of humility. That the human condition is to look for both strength and humility in our leaders. And the most powerful leaders are the ones that can bring this together in the same person, which is very difficult. It's very rare. And you see this in representations of leadership. You see some leaders choose to demonstrate strength, perhaps by riding bare-chested on a horse. Other leaders demonstrate familiarity, accessibility, solidarity with their troops. And the point is that the human condition is conflicted. There is an instinctual wiring in us that craves independence, autonomy, humble leaders who let us determine our own fate. But there is part of us that also looks to shows of strength and confidence in our leaders, particularly in times of crisis, where we're looking for answers, we're looking for a direction. Yes, we are in a democratic recession. Yes, we are in a swing towards authoritarianism, and I think it's because of the accelerating pace of change that we have this swing. But this swing is represented by something that is in us. And I think Trump is a symptom of this, not the cause. And the point there is for us to take a long-term view and see this as part of a cycle that we will come out the other side. Lastly, on resilience, where my career is now focused. As you heard from Connie, I left the study of leadership 6 years ago to found a venture capital firm that now focuses on this. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Jeanette Epps. She's a NASA astronaut. She was with the astronauts that just landed on Tuesday, if you saw. So I had lunch with her a couple of weeks ago. Two things you should know about Dr. Epps. First, for most of her career, she was studying Russian. Why? It was the only way we had to get astronauts to space. This is the Russian Soyuz. And the Russian Soyuz capsule, all the manuals, all the buttons are in Russian. So our American astronauts had to learn Russian because we didn't have the foresight to keep the technology going past the space shuttle so that the United States would have a space launch program. The second thing to know is she spent 285 days in space, which she was very excited about, which was a lot longer than she was supposed to stay, just like the astronauts that just landed, in large part because there was a problem with her ride home. As you'll all recall, the Boeing Starlifter program was deemed unreliable, and we turned to SpaceX to bring them home. So what we're seeing now is that some of our most critical technologies are not only being done by the private sector, not the public sector. They're being done by the private sector on the early stage startup venture side of things. And that's what SpaceX represents here. And this is the point about resilience. One, our most critical technologies are going to come from the private capital markets. And that pattern is now very clear. But two, the real sources of strength are going to be across a broad array of sectors, not just in defense, but the drivers of strength and competitiveness will be in resiliency. And resiliency will come from not just defense, security, and intelligence. It will come from manufacturing, energy, electronics, information, biotech. Why? Because a resilient force is more agile, it is more adaptable. If you can move the manufacturing and the energy to where you need it when the enemy tells you, you are more offensive and capable in warfare. If you are more resilient, you are more distributed in your architecture. You are less redundant. You are more difficult to attack. You are more defensive. And all of that, by the way, provides for a better deterrent, which is really our first priority in the first place, is to prevent conflict. So the resiliency must be the premium and the priority going forward. And it must sit across a more broad array of sectors, not just defense, but these other, what we used to be considering enabling sectors like space as well. That's why we started RSquared. It's an early stage venture fund. We have a very strong belief that Europe and its capital markets and its entrepreneurial ecosystem must be part of the solution. 95% of Europe's patents go underutilized. We believe in building a bridge and sort of accelerating technological innovation and connecting it on both sides of the Atlantic. We think for the US system, this will give access to more sort of talent resources on this side of the Atlantic. And we think for Europe, this will give partnerships that help speed the development of a more vibrant sort of risk-accepting venture ecosystem. So we believe very strongly in this, and that's why this is now the third and hopefully final phase of my career. In closing, I'll go back to the book. We profile 13 leaders. It's really a history book. We profile 13 leaders. 5 of them are European. My favorite is Albert Einstein. I like to remind people there's a couple things to know about Albert Einstein. Of course, he gave us the theory of general relativity. He announced that in a series of lectures here in Germany in 1915. The first thing to know is when he did the lectures, he lectured to a room full of his peers, his scientist peers, and he had the wrong equations. He announced the wrong theory of general relativity. He did not have it right. And it was only by getting the feedback from his peers, in dialogue with his peers, that he got to the right theory of general relativity. It was a collective process. It was a collective effort that got there. He succeeded because of this collective effort. And I point that out because I believe that what you see out of Washington right now, what you see in this current phase of isolationism, does not reflect American disinterest in the fate of Europe. It reflects really America's fatigue with its own 2 decades of military misadventures. And if anything, it reflects American confidence in Europe's path towards strategic autonomy, renewed strength, and eventually coming back into a collective partnership. And what Einstein showed us to be true in the 20th century must again be true in the 21st century. That our scientific discovery and our technological innovation and our renewed competitiveness and strength will come from the private capital markets, and it will come from renewed partnership on both sides of the Atlantic. So with that, Connie, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you, and I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you. You want to?
So, thank you so much. We still have room for 2 or 3 questions. But from my point of view now, it feels good that I know that people like you advise American presidents. I'm less worried now than before, because I'm always thinking, who's telling this guy, the right things? But there must be advisors which have access to the president, I hope at least. So, any questions from your side? Anybody?
Only one rule. You can, well, 2 rules. You can ask whatever you want. There's a camera, but we'll be Chatham House rules. Yeah?
Yes.
Anything you want. We can talk about anything you want. And 2, it has to be in English. Back here.
Many years of rugby practice. Thank you very much. That was great. My name's Nick. This isn't a trick question. It's a real open question because I'm interested in your answer. I heard a couple of things yesterday. One of the statements was we've really got to avoid buying jet fighter planes from America because we've got a big red kill switch. And if Mr. Trump doesn't want us to fly them, then they stay on the ground. Then I heard something in the afternoon and somebody said, the worst thing we can do is stop buying military equipment from America. That'll just annoy Trump. What's your take on that subject? It sounds like a contradiction from 2 different parties I heard yesterday.
Yeah, and I would definitely align myself with the later view. And I think there's reason to be cautious, but it's not a European reason, it's a Western reason. We have the same reason to be cautious. I mean, what you're seeing right now in the defense hardware system is nothing short of a revolution. That we will shift towards a radically different set of not only contractors, but approaches and systems. This is going to take a very long time. The defense procurement system does not move quickly. The problem will not be the red kill switch, right? It's in nobody's interest, not the contractor who sells it to you, and not the American interest for there to even be a red kill switch. The reason to be cautious is in its relevance to the modern war, right? It's fragility. What you want is anti-fragile integrated systems, right? The fact that F-35s and F-22s can not only not speak with one another, but cannot speak with the Eurofighter, and so like that's the real problem. And that will take some time to sort out. And it's not going to be avoided by not buying from American defense providers. It's going to be solved by American defense providers working not only with one another, so these systems are increasingly integrated and able to work together and future-proof, but they're able to work with what's coming out of the Europe system. And that's one of the reasons we believe in this transatlantic, sort of venture partnership and bridge building, so that we get to that future. Because we can't wait for the Boeings and the Lockheeds, Northrops to solve this for us, right? It has to be done sooner. Thank you, Nick. Yeah.
Oops. Hey, good.
Maybe there's two questions. So, like I'm doing cybersecurity, I'm doing a lot of offensive, yeah? But then when I'm trying to explain management, like what it takes, like details, they say like, hey, I want it simple, like give it in me 3 bullet points. But once you simplify it, they have no idea what's happening. And, like on one hand, like you've showed in these pictures of leaders, yeah, reality is completely different. It's complex than that. So on the other hand, they always tell us, hey, elevator pitch, put it in 5 words. Like, then how do we deliver necessarily information so that the decision makers really have the right information, can make the right decision? Because the decision is not made by people who know stuff. Decision is made by management, but they want 3 bullet points, and they have no clue.
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question. And to be honest with you, you're working on the new sort of frontier of battle, right? And look, tanks and fighters are wonderful, and there will be strong incentives to keep producing those. But where the enemy or we will strike first will be in cyber. It will be in space. It will be in energy infrastructure, because that is where you can really inflict the most damage. I mean, look at what happened today in London. If you all saw the news this morning, like we had an electrical substation fire that has now taken off one of Europe's busiest airports for an entire day. Right? These systems are fragile. So whether it's cybersecurity or any one of these other sort of auxiliary frontiers of battle, they're very fragile, they're very important, and they're very technical. Nobody understands them. Nobody understands cyber, nobody understands quantum, nobody understands fusion, and yet these are the things that are going to drive everything, right? Your point, though, is about how do you deal in a world where nobody understands these things. The human mind, one, gravitates towards simplicity, right? We gravitate towards simple answers. Most leaders, if you're dealing with leaders, and most of you either are leaders or dealing with them, they're time constrained and they work on very simple principles, right? They have time for maybe 1 or 2 bullets. The other answer to your question, unfortunately, is that humans react. This is the behavioral science and psychology reality, out of fear. So I think if you're going to do one thing beyond boil it down to simple points, you have to illustrate the fact that this is a real threat, right? And motivate, and it will get their attention better than anything else. And I think, as much as leaders need to go out and face the public with or we'd like them to face with an optimistic vision of promise and hope, right? Very often what gets people's attention and what gets them moving is the potential of a threat or fear. It's a fair question, yeah.
A big applause to Jeff Egger. Jeff, thanks so much.
Thank you.
It was amazing. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you so much. Wait 1 second. We have to make a picture. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.